You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm here at NAMM, the National Association of Music Merchandisers. It is a huge trade hall filled with 125,000 people looking at instruments and gear and software and lighting. I'm Dimitri Vitsa. I'm your host. I'm also the CEO and founder of Rock, Paper, Scissors, a PR firm that specializes in music and tech. And I'm really excited because I have Mike Adams, the president of Moog, and Cyril Lance, the CTO of Moog. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. So I'm sure our audience is familiar with Moog, but what are some things the general public might not realize about the company?
Been around since 1954. Bob founded the company building theremins out of his, his garage or basement with his father. Paid his way through college with that, and met Herb Deutsch in the early 60s. He and Herb worked on a synthesizer concept back then, and the company kind of went away for maybe the late 70s and 80s, and then Bob refounded the company in Asheville in 1994, and we've been building musical instruments since then. Unfortunately, Bob decided to pass away in 2005, and Cyril came on board then. I came on board in 2002. And we've both been there, Cyril, now about 15 years, and this will be my 18th year.
Wow, that's great. I mean, it's so interesting because the company has such a storied history, you know? I mean, I didn't know the story about the theremin. I mean, I wish I put myself through college building theremins.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. So I'm going to jump to the future, and then we can build back up from the past. What are the current trends in synthesizers and keyboards?
Well, we're setting the trends ourselves. Last year we came out with the Moog 1, which is the first polyphonic analog 16-voice synthesizer. It's winning all kinds of awards out there. So, companies really focused on innovation, continuing to push the envelope for analog design and instruments and creative ideas that take the form of that product and many others that we've put together over the last couple of years.
Gotcha. How's the interest in retro synths impacting the overall industry and fans' experience of music?
Well, Dimitri, I mean, when you say retro synth, that's where we began. We are the retro, so we've been experiencing the amazing renaissance of analog synthesizers, almost ever since I got there. When I first got there, there was a lot of software synths, and today, I think people have really recognized that they're a compatible world together, and if you want feel and touch, hardware is what you need. If you're trying to just get into it, the software world is a very quick and easy entry into synthesizers.
Interesting. Cyril, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I think what I would say is that the word retro is probably no longer applicable, and I think the creative music community has really moved beyond that, which is extremely exciting. And I don't think any instrument that we make is retro. I think they're all forward-looking, and I think the Moog, actually the whole music community was very lucky in that some very fundamental concepts came about in the 50s and the early 60s of how to control sound electronically. And Bob was at one of the epicenters of this idea of control voltage and interconnectivity, and really developing interfaces that are tied directly to the artist, so that the artist can develop a personal relationship with that instrument, just like in the 1600s, and you got your wooden violin. That artist then developed a lifelong relationship with that violin. In the same way, these instruments are tools for artists to kind of expand and actualize on their creative vision, and develop a tool that is kind of infinite in exploration. So, we think of it as retro, but really we're just the continuation of this incredible tradition of creating tools for artists to express themselves that started, thousands of years ago. So I think what's exciting now is that all the people are really starting to see this. So if you go to shows, big shows, small shows now, you see an incredible collection. It's no longer like, oh, there's the digital synth guy, there's the iPad guy, there's the DJ guy, and by guy I mean both genders, all genders. It's all coming together because there's just this incredible collection of musical tools. So I feel like what we do is not retro in any way. It's actually trying to use the traditions and the legacies and the knowledge that we have, the particular magic that we can create, and contribute to this incredible wealth of options for artists out there to express themselves.
I love that response because there was a moment where the original Moog sound came about, and you talked about some of the technological innovations or technical innovations really that led to that original sound. And then there was even a gap in the company, and then you guys could come back to that, almost take a little sabbatical from the sound and bring it back. But you're like reuniting it as a thread, a narrative that continues, rather than saying, oh, this is a throwback. No, we're picking up where it left off, which is cool, because if you also mentioned the violin. If you pick up any instrument or any tradition, any genre, you have this thread that continues, and you watch the evolution. And I like how you've now said that it's not about going back to an old sound; it's about coming along with that sound into what's happening now.
Early in just the very first question you asked me was about Moog and things that people might not know. One of the things that I think people miss a lot is that in the 60s, Bob and the company, R.A. Moog Music at that time, R.A. Moog, were able to introduce the concept of a new musical instrument into the music world. And I think a lot of people really, that's disappeared in the last 15 or 20 years as he's passed away. But at the turn of the century, I think it was Time magazine said it was one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century. So I still think that we need to give him due for that, because to introduce any kind of new musical instrument in this world is very difficult. And the synthesizer is really one of the very few that has actually taken hold.
Yeah, that's a good point. Since we're talking about taking a historic moment and turning it into a modern moment and current creation, I'm curious what new trends you see more broadly that are emerging in how people are making music.
There's so much to that question, so I'll just give you some of my personal thoughts about it. I think one of the things that really inspires me is that technology is evolving in a way that is empowering more people to create. It's empowering more people to collaborate, and it's empowering more people to listen. And I think those are three really fundamental parts of the human experience that we need to celebrate and get more of. So technology is really enabling people to have access to tools that they didn't. If you think 20 years ago, the idea of being able to record a track, you'd have to save your pennies and work 3 waitressing or waiter jobs to get into a recording studio. Now your iPhone has a recording studio in it. The ability to communicate with other musicians and across time, space, genres, languages, and I also think there's the boundaries between different types of medium are breaking down, which is very exciting. The boundary between being a musician, the boundary between being a visual artist, the boundary between being a movement artist or whatever it is. So I think these trends are bringing the creative experience into kind of a more larger space, and that's opening a lot of opportunities for many different types of creative visions. And I think if you look at artists like Bjork, who are really pushing the boundaries of what you can do with technology and really exploring cutting edge technology, artificial intelligence, long distance collaboration and expression, visualization. So I think it's a really exciting time, and I think we are at the cusp of a new way of expressing ourselves through technology. And I think one of the things that really excites me is, again, we make interconnectivity in the way instruments interact and control each other has been fundamental to our paradigm, and it's a legacy that was left to us. And what's so exciting to me is that paradigm is totally relevant to what's happening in technology today. And I think that's incredible that these visions and ideas that started in the 50s are really at the center of this nexus of possibility.
Yeah, that's cool. So what about software and mobile devices replacing synths? It seems like, every generation or every couple generations, there's something that pushes something else to its limits and then beyond its limits. On our podcast, we've talked about, performing musicians being really upset about the takeover of the DJ when DJs started performing at Broadway musicals, for example, or at weddings, and you no longer have the live musician. And then we talk about artificial intelligence, and now some DJs are upset that artificial intelligence is now creating music and they don't, or creating mixes or things like that. You guys are in a situation where you've got this potentially disruptive technology as well in the form of, synths going entirely to the desktop. What do you guys? Where do you guys stand on that? What do you feel about it? How does that fit into what you do?
Well, first of all, anything that lowers the barrier for more musicians to get into the market is a good thing for us, because eventually they'll be wanting our kind of product. So I love the fact that software continues to be better and better, and software continues to attract more musicians into our space. And I don't see it incompatible. I just see the two things are just going to continue to meld together. We work on that a lot. Actually, Cyril was involved in what's probably the most widely sold mobile app for a synthesizer ever. I think we have over 700,000 users of it in the NAMM, and that's been an amazing instrument for a lot of people. We saw Flying Lotus use it on stage with an iPad, and it was really cool. It sounds great. We'll continue to evolve, that kind of technology ourselves. But everybody else that's in that world, it's a positive for us, and it's a positive both from the standpoint of new entrants and also a positive from the creativity standpoint, and bringing the hardware and the software together as a whole package, really. Have you been able to actually see a wave of conversion? Somebody that enters through a mobile experience and then switches to a hardware one? I wished I could answer that. Apple makes it very difficult for us to see those users of NAMM. So I'm sure if there's 700,000 users out there, I'm sure that's happened, but I can't point to anything in particular. I mean, I like your answer. I mean, it's seeing more of a larger context, a bigger picture of it's not about an either or, it's about a pathway. And also, you guys keep coming back to creativity, which is super fun to hear. And somehow, Moog has this identity, this brand that really does give, maybe it's because it was founded by an inventor and his origin story is kind of, even if you don't know the story, you feel the story. And in a way, there's something about Moog that you kind of think there's some crazy creative brain behind things. It's not, that's not some imagined perception. We see that almost every day at the place. I can tell you, just the fact that Cyril's here fits into that narrative. Bob, when he was diagnosed with cancer, the last person that he said, "You got to meet this guy," and it was Cyril. And even we feel his presence in our place every single day. He's there. If you come to visit the factory, you'll feel him as well. And it's one of our core values is just to continue to honor him and do his work. That's awesome.
Yeah, I just want to jump in because there's an interesting story. Everything we tend to think that things that are happening now are new, but there's always a parallel. And one of the parallels to what you said, when Bob first came out with the synthesizer, a lot of people take for granted just how radical that was. Like those sounds, the sounds and the possibility of playing musically. There was a lot of people that were really, really upset at Bob because they thought he had invented something that was going to replace the orchestra, and that working musicians, union musicians, were all going to lose their jobs. So I think it's funny that you're talking about disruptive technology now, but that's what people said, when Bob first came out with this instrument. But it's great because, of course, that's silly. I mean, things come and go because of how people want to express themselves, and a tool reflects culture and what needs to be expressed in the moment. And sometimes tools, so when digital synths came around, that was disruptive to analog synths because it was new and different. But eventually people said, hey, digital synths are good for this and analog synths are good for this, and now we're at a place where they're all melding together, and there'll be something new, quote unquote disruptive, but really it's just going to push people to create more, and they'll find, so it's like a big party that's getting larger and larger.
It does seem like it is. I mean, it seems like more people are making music than ever before, and even if it's a 10-year-old with an iPhone that makes some music, that's a 10-year-old that might not have been making music if they weren't bored in the restaurant, taking their parents' phone away from them or whatever it is. And then what's going to happen with that kid? Or even the video games, that they're playing that then influence their musical vision and roots and turn into some other new genre or something like that.
Yeah, I like that image because when we designed the Moog, it was really interesting because the concepts behind the Moog were things that I had been working on in the hardware realm, and then there was this first iPad, and I was like, wow, I could really test these ideas out a lot easier on this thing than building all this hardware. But one of the visions for Moog was to create an instrument that had these elements of expansive, creative, kind of endless, infinite possibilities, so that the most developed artists could be inspired by and use, but yet that a child could walk up to and have instant fun and gratification. So the combination of the visual and the sound, and the fact that there was a way of playing it that required no virtuosity. And one of the really gratifying things when Moog first came out was hundreds of videos came up on YouTube of people handing Moog to these very, very small kids, their eyes lighting up and seeing the visualization of the sound and just moving their fingers around. So, if you can inspire people at such a young age, that's a beautiful thing, and we feel very blessed to be able to do that. And I think what Mike said about feeling Bob's presence in all of this is just a really special experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. I also didn't do a lot of research about Moogfest, but I've heard about it for years, and it seems to be an extension of this idea around creativity. I could just imagine it must be a blast. I'm curious, have you seen certain genres that feel like they're identified with Moog in a way because of the sounds of Moog? Are there new genres that are emerging as you guys have instruments emerging, or are there artists that our listeners could go out and check out and know that they're part of this cultural phenomenon that is Moog?
Well, there's certainly genres that continue to take advantage of the technology, and there's so many genres of music now, and it's just impossible for everybody to be categorized in some way or another. And at Moogfest, one of the things that we try to do is to recognize those artists that are really pushing the edge, whether it's with our technology or whoever's technology. We invite everybody in, including all of our competitors, to that. But yes, for example, there's a North Carolina group, Sylvan Esso, that has really pushed the boundaries. They've done a lot of work with us. We love those guys. I love Lower Dens. That's something they can check out. I mentioned Flying Lotus. We just released a video with them called Building Your World, and it's showcasing some of our newest technology. So I think there's certainly at Moogfest and throughout the world there's artists that are pushing the boundaries with our technology. It's really great.
Talk about uncut gems.
Oh yeah, and we just finished shooting it was Daniel Lopin, right? And he's a soundtrack producer for the movie Uncut Gems. We did like that's longer than that. It's probably a 30-minute documentary film with him showing how he used the Moog 1 to really create the sounds that weren't available to him any other way for that particular movie than with the Moog 1. We worked really closely with him on that. And the documentary is something that everybody should go out and watch, especially if they're interested in how film and music connect together and the soundtrack associated with that. That's a whole ton of our customers. You mentioned video games a little while ago. Lots of our customers are video game music people. You know, they're behind the scenes of that, but they love the Moog because it's so flexible. And in this particular case with Uncut Gems, it really gave Daniel something that he couldn't get from anywhere else. And I think that kind of technology really pushes the creative edge for people that, you know, he was really searching for something and just couldn't find it. So
Where can people see that documentary?
on our YouTube channel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So I want to ask you one more general question. Lynn, let's talk a little bit about NAMM since we're here. What are there new things that you think will be emerging in the next 5 or 10 years that will change music making or listening, like specific things that you've kind of got on your radar? Again, we've talked about artificial intelligence on this show before. We talked about 5G and the influence on speed, but also collaboration, stuff like that. What other things are you seeing that you think are going to, 5 or 10 years from now, we're going to look back and say, oh, we didn't see that coming, and wow, look what happened?
Well, I'm not a good futurist, and a lot of times I have my head in my lab bench. But so I think there's a lot of people more qualified to talk about it than myself. But I think some of the things that I see happening, which I think are going to be really significant, are there's a lot of ways that are opening up in the way that humans can interact physically and psychologically with the tool. Let's just call it a tool or an instrument. And I think that's we're going to see a lot of innovation and different ways of manipulating sound haptically in space, the user experience, the user interface, and also again, where the instrument becomes probably part of the composition and part of the movement in a much larger context. Like right now, we think tradition of instrument is something that you sit down or you hold and play, and your fingers actuate something or press a string or manipulate something physically. I think that whole concept is opening up, and I think that's going to be a really exciting thing to see develop.
It's interesting. We talk about, as one of our seismic shifts, music is like air, and that follows the idea of music is like water, which is a subscriptions for streaming service changes how people feel about listening to music. And we have music like fire, how music is taking over other industries, and showing up in video games and films in new ways and corporate videos and all sorts of other things. But music like air, originally concept was about ambient technology in the sense of you talk to the air and the music comes back, meaning Alexa, Siri, the voice, smart speaker kind of stuff. There's no longer an interface to interact with for listening to music. But you're talking about possibly removing some of the interface for making music. So now I've got a new definition of music like air, not only on the listening side, but thanks to you, on the creation side, and the idea that maybe you don't hold anything and something around you is picking up your signals that allow you to mess with sound and sound waves.
Yeah, and I think if you take it to the next level, I think there's another boundary that we set up through language of music and sound. Music is part of sound, which is part of your natural environment. It's vibrations that come into your ear, and you experience it emotionally based on your history and your physiology. And so I think another thing that is happening is we live in a sonic environment, and that's another thing that is kind of, there's been people been talking about this, like Oliveris and Brian Eno and stuff. But as technology develops, I think a consciousness of sound and breaking down the barriers conceptually between music and sound, and that's something that synthesis does really well, because it kind of says, well, what is music, right? One of the sources on the synthesizer is noise. That's physical noise. It's moving electrons that are bouncing around because of heat. That's a very physical, visceral source that is then getting translated into sound, but it's a real, physical manifestation of the environment. So another thing that I think that we can look towards is the relationship between sound and our physiology, and how does sound affect mood? How does sound maybe help you get through issues like depression, sleep disorders, and people are using it to study helping people with autism and all sorts of physical things. So if we really pull the lid off the thing, because a synthesizer is something that creates sound that modifies the environment you're in, and we take the word music out, or we say music is just a human concept that we throw in that pot. So that's another whole area, like how do our sound environments affect our health and well-being, and make the world a more happy, beautiful place.
Mike, now we know why Bob Moog said you should meet Cyril.
Yeah, exactly. I think we would be remiss if we didn't at this point pull it back to Bob one more time and say this is the 100th anniversary of the theremin. This year is the 100th anniversary of the theremin, which is what got Bob interested in music and musical instruments to begin with. He was fascinated by Leon Theremin's theremin, or Lev Theremin's theremin, which we call today. So we'll be seeing a lot come out this year on the 100th anniversary of the theremin. There's the New York Theremin Society that's doing a lot around this. We'll be doing some things this year as well. But the theremin is a lot of what Cyril was just talking about. You move your hands and you are the instrument. You are a part of that circuit, and if you're not, if you understand that, then you can really evolve that instrument. And Bob loved that fact that it was he loved the physical interaction between the artist and that particular instrument, and thought that was fascinating and most beautiful human interface between music and the artist that he'd ever seen, and that's what fascinated him.
Wow, I have questions about NAMM, and it's almost silly to ask them at this point because we went so deep so fast, and this has been fun. But we are here at NAMM. It brought us together, got us to meet each other. Are there things that you hope will come out of NAMM that people should check out? Are there new things you guys are releasing, or features, or new stories that you're hoping will come out of this?
We do have a couple of new releases here at NAMM. We've got a new Subsequent 25, which is we've had this product called the Sub Fatty for probably 10 years now, and we're just added a paraphonic capability to it and some other capabilities, and people are really digging that. Cyril can probably talk a little more about that. And we also did a retro release of a vocoder that Bob had designed in the maybe late 60s, probably. I don't remember. And we just put that back out in a limited sort of edition of that piece. So we've got a couple of announcements, but NAMM's not our particular cup of tea for releasing new products. We usually tend to do that at Moogfest or at other events that we're able to put together ourselves.
When is Moogfest?
We're not doing it this year. Usually do it in April or May around Bob's birthday on May 23rd, but we decided to take this year off.
So you'll be back in 2021, spring?
We'll be back.
In North Carolina?
In North Carolina, likely in Durham.
How many people come to that?
Depends. Any year, I think the biggest year we had was about 35,000 people, and it's been 15,000, 35,000.
And is it mostly performances?
It's a really an intersection of arts and entertainment and music and technology, and we have usually at least 100 panelists during the day. So there's a lot of people that are talking about all the subjects that you're interested in, which is why you'd really like it. There'll be futurists there, bioethicists. We have relationships with MIT and Oxford University. We've had professors and great speakers come in from very knowledgeable people from all over, all walks of life come and talk during the day. and then music at night. And the concept is that all this technology and future thought and thinking that you hear during the day goes a lot smoother with some music at night. And so we sort of created that event around that. Now there's a lot of festivals and stuff that have sort of seen that and copied that, and we're going to have, so that's why one of the reasons we're taking a year off. We really need to rethink it, because I think in 2014 we introduced that concept. It was very novel, and I think that year in the New York Times said, other than Beyonce, this was the best music festival that they went to that year. So we need to reconfigure it, recreate it, and rethink it, and we'll do that for 2021.
Yeah, it sounds like fun. I've got to go. Thank you so much for taking the time to come into this not as loud booth here at NAMM. We've been talking to Mike Adams, president, and Cyril Lance, the CTO of Moog, and you've been listening to Music Tectonics. We've got more episodes coming from NAMM. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and really appreciate you listening. We'll have more for you soon.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.